Hi, I'm Dave Kale. Welcome to this Christian Business Insights podcast show where my goal is to provide you with practical, actionable ideas to help you create businesses and careers of excellence and at the same time multiply your influence for the kingdom. I have been a Christian in business for over 30 years, and I have personally and contractually consulted with over 500 different sales organizations. So in these podcasts, I combine the lessons that I have learned with an out-of-the-box experience and perspective on Christianity that you will find challenging. And we put that together to provide you with practical insights and ideas that you can use to live better and lead better. Welcome to the journey. Hi, this is Dave. Can you teach ethics to an employee? Well, that's the question I'm going to deal with. As you know, I get questions from listeners and readers from time to time, and this is one. So here's the question. Dave, I've hired a new, young, aggressive salesperson. I want to make sure he understands the ethical boundaries of his job. Is there some recommended way to teach ethics to a new salesperson? Great question. So here's my answer. You can teach him ethics, but I'm not sure he will learn them. Okay, let me explain. First, there is a huge difference between teaching and learning. It's bigger than just semantics. Teaching is what teachers and trainers do. It refers to the communication organized and put forth by someone who wants the other person to understand something. That's what teaching is. Learning is what learners do. It refers to the understanding and realizations that lead to decisions that take place in the mind of the learners, usually in response to some conversation or event. For adults on the job, you can tell that someone has learned when they change their behavior and act differently. That's a key. Learning for adults on the job is about behavior change. They act differently when they've learned. All right, teaching and training, or teaching and learning, unfortunately, the two don't always have a relationship to one another. Just because you teach something doesn't mean that someone learns it. The world is full of teachers and trainers who teach, but no one learns. Now, with that as a little background, back to your question. Yes, you should teach your new salesperson what it means to be ethical in your company. And there are several ways to do it. For example, if you have a code of ethics, print a copy and have that person read it and sign it that they read it. And if you don't have a code of ethics, then I'm going to recommend you, I have a blog post called 10 Commandments for the Ethical Salesperson. And I'll put a link in the show notes so you can check that out if you'd like. So number one is you have some written code of ethics, and you talk with that person about it. Discuss some potential scenarios, and point out what would be ethical and unethical behavior in those circumstances. So if you expect him or her to be ethical, you have the responsibility to communicate that expectation to that person and precisely describe what it means. So step one, communicate the expectation to him, precisely describe what it means, and it really, really is helpful to have that in writing. Now, that's how you teach ethics, which is your question. However, I suspect that your real question is something more like this. Quote, how can I be sure that he will behave ethically? So it's one thing to teach ethics and another thing to be sure the person will behave ethically. See, that's a different question. Now, you may have taught him or her, but that doesn't in any way guarantee that that person will learn. Here's why. There are certain qualities of character that reside so deeply in a person that they resist almost every attempt to modify them from the outside. They sprout to life via a confluence of heredity and upbringing, and they push their roots down into a person's formative years. Those roots take hold and twist themselves around the deepest part of a person and become almost impossible to untangle. And as managers and trainers, we mostly concern ourselves with the most superficial levels of behavior. You know, we make good time management decisions, for example, or learning to ask better questions or close more effectively. These are all behaviors that are superficial. However, we want to make broader, more long-lasting, and important changes. We have to work deeper than just the superficial. Ethics and integrity arise out of the deeper aspects of a person's psyche. While our instruction may get us some situational compliance on the surface, the real substance of that character trait is deeper. Now, here's the rub. We cannot change those deeper character traits. We cannot make an unethical person, ethical. Of course, we can shape the character of our children, but adults on the job? Nope, not going to happen. We can plant seeds, we can influence, we can provide direction, but we cannot change a person at the deeper levels. That's why, by the way, in hiring a new salesperson, I recommend you hire qualities of character and then educate the new person in the product and the sales competencies that go with it. You can help them change behavior at a superficial level, but you cannot change the deeper qualities of character. There is, though, some hope. While we cannot change them, they can change themselves. They can choose to become more ethical, for example. They can choose to become more sensitive to others. They can choose to become more empathetic. They can choose to become more responsible. It's not easy. It takes a strong commitment, an act of will, and a persistent effort. The vast majority of mankind, frankly, would rather not. So you can encourage him or her, but the commitment and effort to change must come from inside that person. While we're on this subject, let's take it one step deeper. The greatest change in a person's character comes through spiritual transformation, because that is the deepest level. It impacts everything else. We all know people who have experienced a spiritual transformation and as a result became different people. Maybe you're one of those people. I certainly am. The character that I had and the person that I was before I met God, and was nothing like the character I have now. Not that I or anyone else is complete. We're all works in process, continuing developing. I have a long way to go as well, but I'm markedly different today than I was 40 years ago. Those spiritual transformations, at least the positive ones, always require an encounter with Jesus Christ. He said, quote, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Now, if you believe him, that means you're going to have a spiritual encounter with God, and we must do it through Christ. Everything else is either artificial and empty, or at best just a step in that direction. If we want to change our lives significantly, transformationally, then we need to encounter Christ. Now, I happen to believe him, and I recommend you do too. If you really want to see a person change, facilitate a spiritual transformation. Introduce them to Christ and see what happens. By the way, great question. Thanks for asking. That's it. We're done. Bye-bye.